So this time we're looking at how Claude 5 completely changed the rules of prompt design.
We're diving into the new rule where writing more actually backfires. I packed CLAUDE.md with all kinds of rules and best practices, but ever since I switched to Claude 5, it just stopped listening to any of it.
Oh, you hit that too, Sharina.
I tell it not to write comments, and it writes them anyway.
Anthropic actually explained that on their official blog, they cut the Claude Code system prompt by more than 80%.
Cutting 80% didn't hurt the eval scores.
It didn't. Apparently, the new generation actually performs better with fewer guardrails.
So the CLAUDE.md I carefully built up was actually working against me.
Not exactly working against you. The whole common sense around prompt design changed fundamentally. Let's go through those new rules today, based on the official blog post. The biggest change is how you write rules in the first place. The old generation system prompt used to look like this. Don't write comments, no multi-line docstrings, don't create documentation.
Oh, I used to write stuff like that too.
And the new generation prompt is just this. Write to match the surrounding code.
That alone gets you the same result.
The new generation reads the surrounding code, so there's no need to list out detailed prohibitions.
What happens if you write it out in detail instead?
That's the interesting part. Excessive constraints actually become a shackle. Anthropic calls it unhobbling Claude, which means taking the shackles off.
It's counterintuitive that performance goes up the fewer constraints you add.
The old generation had weaker judgment, so you had to constrain it for worst-case scenarios. But doing that to the new generation just kills the judgment it actually has. Next is the approach of showing tool usage through examples. The standard playbook in prompt engineering used to be writing concrete examples, right?
That's few-shot prompting. I used it a lot too.
With the new generation, that actually backfires.
What's the logic behind examples being bad?
When you show an example, the model gets pulled toward it and its search space narrows. Even if a better solution exists, it only searches in directions similar to the example.
So how do you control its behavior without writing examples?
You guide it through the interface design of the tool itself. Take the status parameter of the to-do tool, for example. You make it an enum with 3 choices: pending, in progress, and completed. Then you just write only one in progress at a time.
So narrowing down the choices makes it use the tool correctly, even without examples.
The old version of the to-do tool had around 9,100 characters explaining how to use it. Now it only takes a few lines. Given all that, the question becomes, what should you actually put in CLAUDE.md?
Exactly. If rules and examples are both out, I have no idea what to put in there.
The answer is, don't put everything in from the start. There's a concept called progressive disclosure. You load the information it needs, only when it needs it.
What does "when it needs it" actually look like in practice?
Take code review procedures or a verification checklist. For example, you split those out into a separate skill. Claude only loads that skill when it actually starts a review task.
So you don't need to put it in the system prompt every single time.
CLAUDE.md itself can also be split into a hierarchical structure. You keep just a light overview at the root and push the details into child files.
But wouldn't that make it hard for Claude to find the file it needs?
Here's the thing. It can't find it unless you write everything out, is actually a myth. With a mechanism called tool search, Claude can search for the tools and information it needs on its own.
So letting it search things out works better than kindly laying everything out for it.
Also, remember that old technique of repeating important things.
Right, writing it in the system prompt and in the tool definition.
Exactly. The older generation had a habit of prioritizing whatever came at the end of the context. So you had to write how to use the tool in both places, or it wouldn't stay stable.
Sharina used to put the same explanation in a bunch of places too, just to be safe.
With a new generation, you don't need that duplication anymore. You can just put how to use the tool in the tool definition alone.
What happens if the system prompt and the tool definition say slightly different things?
That's actually the dangerous part. When contradictory instructions end up mixed together, Claude tries to reconcile them on its own, and the behavior gets unpredictable.
So writing it redundantly was actually just planting seeds of contradiction.
The new generation gets it the first time, so it's best to just keep it simple and say it in one place. So everything we've talked about so far really comes down to changing how you write Claude.md. But the new generation actually has a feature where you don't even need to write it by hand anymore.
So that thing where you append with the hash key, we don't need that anymore.
Right. There's a feature called auto memory. Claude automatically saves relevant information straight out of the conversation.
So it just learns on its own without you having to type "remember this."
But this one's actually pretty divisive in the developer community.
It sounds convenient though. What's the problem?
There's criticism that it ends up remembering weird stuff on its own. It ignores context and saves unnecessary information. And it's just bad at deciding what to keep.
Yeah, if it remembers even code you were just trying out, that could actually be a problem.
There are even reports that performance improved after turning auto memory off. At this point, it's probably safest to use it cautiously and see how it goes.
Whether to leave it all to auto memory or manage it by hand, finding the right balance is tricky.
When you get plan mode to write out a spec, don't you usually have it right marked down?
Yeah, I get it to summarize the requirements as bullet points, then have it implement based on that.
With the new generation, there's an approach that works even better. Instead of a marked down spec, you hand it an HTML mockup.
So it's faster to just show the real thing than to put the button in the top right in text.
Right. Code communicates way more precisely than a written description. There's also a technique where you hand over a test suite as a reference.
I always thought tests were something you write after the implementation.
If you define the expected behavior in tests up front, it removes any ambiguity in the spec. Just hand it over with write-in implementation that passes these tests. There's no room left for misinterpretation.
So showing it in code is more reliable than a long explanation in natural language.
Taking it even further, there's also a method where you use a rubric to dynamically spin up a verification agent.
A rubric, like some kind of evaluation criteria?
Right? You define quality criteria up front and have a separate verifier agent check against it. It's less about conveying the spec in words and more about handing over the verification process itself. This official blog post has actually been a huge topic on Hacker News too.
What kind of reactions?
The top comment was half joking and half serious about it. It said the system prompt will eventually just boil down to you know what to do.
So the ideal model is one that runs on nothing but you know, right?
It's turned into a meme, but honestly, the direction is right.
But that means handing over all the judgment calls to the AI, right?
Yeah, a lot of people are worried about exactly that. There's criticism like this. Telling us to trust its judgment is basically the same as loosening the guardrails. Some people are outright angry, saying I'm the one who's supposed to make the call.
I kind of get being scared to let go of control.
Also, what's interesting is the frustration with Claude's own particular phrasing. Like load-bearing seam. Claude uses phrases like that a lot, right?
Ah, that's what they call a Claudism. Yeah, it does have a pretty strong flavor.
People pointed out that a seam is supposed to be a structurally weak point in the first place. On the other hand, there's also positive feedback saying that breaking things out into skills really works.
The fact that people complain is proof that everyone's really put it through its paces. So people keep saying to cut down on rules and examples and get rid of duplicates. But with the Claude.md and skills I already have, where do I even start?
Actually, Anthropic's already put together a proper tool for that. It's a command called Claude Doctor. You can also call it with /doctor. It diagnoses your existing Claude.md and skills, and even cleans them up automatically.
Can it actually judge what's excessive on its own?
Yeah, they call it right-sizing, basically trimming things down to the right size. Things like duplicated explanations, or fine-grained rules that newer models don't even need anymore.
So what's the diagnosis actually based on?
Apparently they built in what Anthropic learned from trimming their own system prompt. I actually tried running it on my dev environment. At first, it doesn't rewrite anything. It just reads, going through the environment end to end. It cross-checks skills and extensions against the record of when they were last called, and how many times. Turns out, there were over 10 skills that had never once been called.
If you're not using them, they're not really hurting anything, right?
The actual skill only gets read when it's called, but the description shown in the listing loads into context every single time. And there were even skills with broken links, ones that never got loaded in the first place. For the CLAUDE.md side, it told me to delete lines that just copy what's already in a config file. You could open that config file anyway.
Doesn't that risk deleting rules you shouldn't touch?
It kept those separate. Rules that say never do this under any circumstances, it decided to keep those. It doesn't apply anything on its own either. It shows you every suggestion, and only makes changes once you approve. 10 minutes from diagnosis to applying it, and the stuff that got loaded every time dropped by around 2,000 tokens. If you're moving over to Claude 5, it's worth trying once.
Sounds faster to just let Doctor take a look first, instead of reviewing everything by hand.
Cutting 80% and not losing performance. When you actually stop and think about it, that's wild.
I always believed the more carefully you wrote it, the better it'd be.
That whole assumption got completely flipped. Now it's an era where cutting the constraints actually boosts performance.
So, in the extreme, you're saying you don't need to write anything at all?
Not quite. It's not about how much you write. It's about designing what you hand over, and when. Instead of stuffing everything in upfront, you give it only what's needed, right when it's needed.
So timing and structure matter more than the amount of prompt.
And honestly, I think it takes some courage to let go of the prompt assets you've built up over time too.
Cutting down the Claude.md you worked so hard on, yeah, I can see that being hard to let go of.
But if the model's evolved, the prompt design has to evolve with it. I'd start by running Claude Doctor to diagnose things, then adjust from there.
Kind of scared to see how much gets cut from Sharina's Claude.md, but I'm gonna try it.